This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Now, White House officials say they have reached the framework for a deal to keep TikTok operational in the U.S., with Presidents Trump and Xi set to seal the details in a call on Friday. China unveils measures to help its services industry and proposes reforms to attract more foreign and private capital. South Korea says that tariff talks with the U.S. have stalled, but President Lee Jae-myung is determined to avoid a deal that's bad for local companies. And tensions flare in the South China Sea following a collision of Coast Guard vessels near a disputed shoal. China accuses Philippine ships of illegal entry and of ramming a vessel. And in Japan, the battle for power heats up. Foreign Minister Shinjiro Koizumi and Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi are the latest to enter the race to replace the Prime Minister. Also in East Asia tonight, students in South Korea mourn the death of conservative American firebrand Charlie Kirk, even as his legacy divides opinion. And we'll tell you who has snatched Thailand's crown as the favorite holiday destination among Chinese tourists. The White House says it's close to a deal to keep TikTok operational in the U.S. The video-sharing app's Chinese owner, ByteDance, was supposed to find a buyer for its U.S. operations by tomorrow or face a ban over national security concerns. But after talks with Chinese officials in Madrid, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that they have reached the framework for a deal. Now, the precise structure of the final agreement remains unclear, but American broadcaster CBS reports that tech firm Oracle is among multiple companies that will enable TikTok to continue operating in the U.S. Mr. Bessent says that President Donald Trump will complete the deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in a call on Friday.
I think the framework is for it to switch to U.S.-controlled ownership. But again, I'm not going to get ahead of the leaders' call on Friday. We have a framework. They'll have to confirm the deal.
A Chinese top trade negotiator, Li Chenggang, says that the two sides have reached a basic framework for resolving issues, but insists the deal would not come at the expense of China or its companies.
中方一贯反对将科技和经贸问题政治化、工具化、武器化，绝不会以牺牲原则立场、企业利益和国际公平正义为代价，寻求达成任何协议。
Many Chinese residents have welcomed the deal, recognizing it as an opportunity to improve relations with the U.S.
他们能够继续用 TikTok， 我觉得是一个好事情，对。但是我觉得他们还是不应该把股权转让出去，因为其实我觉得对于一个外国企业在别的国家进行做生意或者什么事，都是一个很正常的事情。然后这也是我们自由贸易应该去遵循的原则。
因为这个协议，两国关系更加进一步恢复了之前的正常关系，希望之后能够更多的机会去交流、去沟通。
For more, Deborah Wong, she joins us live from Shenzhen. Debs, this highly anticipated phone call on Friday between the two presidents, what can we expect?
So the details of the framework are currently quite scant now. You know, you've heard from the two negotiators on China and U.S. side. There hasn't been a lot of major discussions. You know, they're leaving it to the leaders to finalize the discussion, finalize the framework on Friday. But what we do know is that a consortium of U.S. companies will be involved in the TikTok continuing its operations in the U.S. And for that to work out, you know, we do know that China currently is reviewing its tech export and license use of intellectual property. So we could be expecting the leaders to perhaps iron out some requirements for the licensing deal under the framework. Now, the talks in Spain have also set out quite clear parameters, which President Xi Jinping is likely to reiterate, especially for China. You know, the deal for them to work out must not be made at the expense of international fairness. They've also mentioned that the negotiations must be done on an equal footing. Now, this language is very important here because for China, they say that, you know, having a deal done on equal footing means also going against unilateral bullying to the Chinese. Arriving at a consensus is in their mutual interest. In fact, it's on these grounds that they've urged the U.S. to lift other trade restrictions, such as their continuously expanding sanction list against Chinese entities. So we can expect President Xi Jinping to press Trump on that point. Now, Trump, on the other hand, could also be raising the NVIDIA issue. We do know that on Monday, the same day as the talks happened, you know, the Chinese side has also announced that NVIDIA violated anti-competition laws, and that's something that didn't quite sit well with U.S. Treasury head Scott Bessent, who said that it was bad timing. So these external factors may influence the details of the framework, from licensing requirements down to the precise stake that TikTok's current parent company, ByteDance, may hold. And we can also expect leaders to confirm to announce the confirmation that the extension to the TikTok deal could be extended by about 90 days, because right now we still don't have a clear date.
As for the truce deadline, that is looming. So what does this mean for the wider trade talks?
So the Madrid talks only focus very much on the trade deal. It didn't quite target any other discussions regarding the wider trade deals. It is likely that the outcome of this TikTok deal could be used as leverage by either party to lift other trade restrictions or even sanctions, you know, like what we've seen previously, where China negotiated for the U.S. To remove certain export restrictions on tech equipment after it tightened exports of critical minerals and magnets to the U.S. And then, of course, there's also the matter, a huge matter, in fact, of China's purchase of Russian oil. We do know that in the lead-up to these talks, you know, President Trump actually spoke to the European Union, getting them to impose 50 to 100% tariffs on China to counter Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Chinese Commerce Ministry did push back on Monday, the same day as the talks happened in Spain, saying that these secondary tariffs do reflect unilateral bullying as well as coercion, which is something that, you know, they've reiterated, they've emphasized that they're totally against. European media did come out to say that the bloc, they are quite unlikely to agree to this deal because China remains one of their largest trading partners. But analysts studying all these developments collectively are saying that this indicates that bilateral relations, appear to be at a standstill because neither party seems willing to back down at the moment. What we are looking out for is a potential meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi. Potentially one window could be APEC in South Korea in October. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on.
There are lots to keep an eye on. Thanks so very much for that report. Deborah Wong speaking to us live from Shenzhen. And for more insights on what goes into the potential TikTok deal, we will be speaking with Dr. Nasha Bathen from La Trobe University a little later this hour. South Korea, meantime, says that tariff talks with the U.S. have stalled. But President Lee Jae-myung reportedly does not want to rush into a deal that forces Korean firms to sustain losses. The country's top trade envoy, meantime, is in Washington in hopes of finalizing the July agreement. Seoul is seeking to achieve a reduction in levies for its crucial auto industry, similar to Japan's, which kicked in today. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk has more.
South Korea's largest car maker, Hyundai Motor, is feeling the heat as Japanese exports to the U.S. faced a reduced tariff of 15% starting Tuesday. That's lower than the 25% imposed on South Korea's automakers, putting them at a disadvantage. Hyundai in July, when reporting on its second quarter earnings, said the impact of tariffs would be greater in the third and fourth quarters. The issue of tariffs and the recent raid on a Hyundai facility in the United States earlier this month were raised in Parliament on Tuesday, amid concerns that the country's economy could be hit badly. South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun responded to lawmakers, saying it was trying to ease car makers' burden by finding a win-win outcome with the U.S. But he said Seoul will not rush the trade talks because he wants to protect its national interests and maintain a strong South Korea-U.S. relationship. And that South Korea could not sign a trade deal with the U.S. when the leaders met last month in Washington because the U.S. demands were not acceptable.
그 당시 패키지로는 우리가 수용할 수 없는 것이었기 때문에 문서화하는 것이 않는 것이 오히려 우리 국익을 지키는 것이다. 그리고 디테일에 있기 때문에 그것을 계속 협상을 하는 편이 우리 국익을 지키는 길이다 해서 그렇게 된 것입니다.
Trade Minister Yo Han-gu is in Washington to continue negotiations. The tariff talks are underway at a time when both sides are also trying to mend strained ties, following a recent U.S. immigration raid where more than 300 South Korean workers were arrested at a battery plant in the state of Georgia, one of South Korea's biggest U.S. investment projects by Hyundai Motor and LG. South Korea's foreign ministry says it will soon start conducting a more thorough review with the companies to determine whether any human rights violations occurred during the raid. Anger over the raid continues to simmer in Seoul, with protest rallies planned for later this week. Over the weekend, hundreds took to the streets outside the U.S. Embassy, warning that they would boycott American goods if Washington keeps threatening South Korean interests. Lim Yang-seok, CNA, Seoul.
Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, NVIDIA's latest AI chip designed for China doesn't seem to be flying off the shelves. We'll explore the reason.
We've really got to think about what it means for society to be able to adopt these systems safely.
OpenAI's chief operating officer there talking about steps being taken to address increasing AI risks as the organization sets its sights on an Asian expansion. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and I've got Henry Yin joining us now for the very latest in business news. Some fresh news that came out not too long ago, something about China rolling out a slew of measures to spur its services sector. Tell us more.
Yes, Otali, and that comes after China August activity data showing that continued weakness in the country. Now, China is stepping up efforts to stimulate the economy after disappointing data, with industrial output and consumption having their worst performance of 2025 last month. Authorities have released measures aimed at boosting service consumption, pledging to expand the opening up of sectors including internet and culture, and encourage the hosting of international sports events. The measures have been jointly released by 9 government bodies, including the Commerce Ministry. They call for the easing of restrictions to attract more foreign and private capital to fields such as mid to high-end medical care. Efforts will also be made to encourage financial institutions to increase credit supply to businesses in the service consumption sector. Now, South Korea's car exports hitting a record high in August despite ongoing U.S. tariffs. Exports jumped 9% from a year earlier to $5.5 billion. That's the highest figure ever for August. In volume, that's more than 200,000 vehicles shipped abroad. Eco-friendly cars drove the growth. Exports of electric, hybrid and hydrogen models soared more than 26%. EV shipments alone shot up nearly 80% from last year, driven by strong demand in Europe. Shipments to the European Union surged 54%, but exports to North America slid more than 8%, marking the 6th straight monthly drop. That's largely due to Washington's 25% tariffs. The U.S. has agreed to cut tariffs on South Korean cars to 15% under a trade deal signed in July. But it's still unclear when that will take effect as both sides hammer out the details. At the same time, Washington is moving ahead with the same 15% tariff on Japanese cars starting this week. NVIDIA's latest AI chip designed for the Chinese market is struggling to gain traction. Reuters reports that the RTX 6000D model, built mainly for AI inference tasks, has so far drawn only lukewarm interest, with some of China's biggest tech firms holding back on orders. Industry insiders say that the chip is pricey for what it delivers, costing around $7,000, while cheaper alternatives are already circulating on the grey market. Meanwhile, uncertainty also hangs over NVIDIA's H20 chips. Tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance are still waiting for their orders to be processed. And access to cutting-edge AI chips remains a major flashpoint in US-China trade tensions. Washington has pulled back from harsher export curbs, but Beijing is doubling down on efforts to push Chinese firms toward homegrown chips. And just yesterday, Beijing accused NVIDIA of breaching anti-monopoly laws, adding yet another layer of uncertainty for the company amid ongoing trade talks between the two countries. Investors are cautiously watching a potential breakthrough in US-China trade talks in Madrid, where Greater China markets close moderately higher. Now, we are seeing that Shanghai Composite Index up only marginally, while Shenzhen Component Index up by about 0.5%. In Hong Kong, the benchmark Hang Seng Index trading just flat. And investors digesting a US-China framework deal on TikTok ahead of talks between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Friday. And Chinese chip makers on the mainland gained today after Beijing ruled that NVIDIA breached anti-monopoly laws over a high-profile 2020 deal. Analysts say the move could be part of Beijing's push to accelerate localization and be less reliant on foreign chip makers. Also checking on the share of Tencent at the moment, up by 0.2%, with the tech giant launching its first bond sale in 4 years, stepping up fundraising as Chinese tech firms double down in the global AI race. Bloomberg reports Tencent is marketing 5, 10, and 30-year notes for offshore yuan, the latest batch of the so-called dim sum bonds, adding to nearly $18 billion in outstanding debt. The chief of the world's largest maker of sensors for self-driving vehicles warns that the world is not ready for fully driverless cars. And David Lee, co-founder of Hesai, says that there is a very low tolerance for mistakes when it comes to autonomous driving, referring to accidents or deaths caused by it, and that it goes beyond technology and has social and political implications. And earlier this year, China tightened self-driving technology regulations after a fatal crash involving Xiaomi's SU7 sedan, which killed 3. And Lee's comments came ahead of Hesai's strong debut on the Hong Kong exchange. And shares of Hesai ending its first day up nearly 10%. After it surged up to 15%, Hesai's Hong Kong debut nabbed the sensor maker more than $500 million, which it says will be used to lower production costs. The company is the first of several US-traded Chinese companies that are raising funds in Hong Kong over fears that Washington may delist Chinese stocks trading in the US. And staying in Hong Kong, analysts are wary of a bubble building in the territory after a biotech stock reached sky-high proportions just months after it went public. The firm in question, Tranthera Sciences. Its stock has surged more than 5,000% in less than 3 months, which gave it a market cap of nearly $30 billion, outpacing biotech giants Innovent and Akeso. And stocks of Tranthera having a volatile day in intraday trade, soaring as much as 64% today, but ending down more than half. And Tranthera's erratic movements drew attention from local media, which questioned how a firm that has no products, revenue, or profits could outstrip industry giants. Well, the company says that it's aware of the, quote, unusual movements, but that business is usual. Analysts say that Tranthera's movements reflect more of investor sentiment rather than fundamentals, with investors searching for the biotech sector's next blockbuster company. Well, ChatGPT maker OpenAI is stepping up its expansion here in Asia as artificial intelligence becomes increasingly embedded not only in our personal lives, but also in the way we work. Now, CNA's Sarah Caldi sat down with Brad Lightcap, Chief Operating Officer of OpenAI, to discuss the company's plans for the region. And we should note that like many newsrooms around the world, CNA also uses OpenAI products.
In Asia, kind of broadly, Korea, Japan, Singapore, parts of Southeast Asia, we're growing anywhere from 3 to 4x year over year just on the consumer side, just in terms of active users. We've got now Asian markets that are kind of ranking top or near top by certain metrics for certain parts of our business. So Japan's now our largest enterprise business outside of the United States. Korea is one of our top markets for developers outside the United States, one of our top markets also for paid subscribers outside the United States. And so the demand and the kind of active rates of use here in Asia are significant.
OpenAI also recently announced it reached an agreement with Microsoft as it works to restructure as a for-profit company. The ChatGPT maker said its non-profit arm will be given a $100 billion equity stake in its for-profit corporation, though it has not disclosed the percentage of ownership. Sarah asked Chief Operating Officer Brad Lightcap for more details on the partnership.
Microsoft is a critical partner for us. They have been from the beginning. It sets us both up for the future in compelling ways. AI is so interesting because it's changing constantly. It's the one technology we've built as human beings that, it's not the same thing 6 months from now as it is today, and it won't be the same thing 6 years from now as it is today. And so all the partnerships that we build have to kind of exist on foundations that change over time and can evolve and adapt as the progress adapts.
For OpenAI, it was created as a nonprofit with safeguards to ensure that the technology, benefits humanity and not just generate profit. And some say that this reorganization kind of weakens the safeguards that were initially put in place. So will OpenAI still have a duty to its charitable mission over generating profits?
100%. We actually see it the opposite way. We see it as strengthening our relationship with our nonprofit entity and strengthening the role that the nonprofit entity has as OpenAI continues to evolve. Coming out of this, our nonprofit will be, significantly large, right? It will be, I think, one of the largest nonprofits in the world. And one of the things that we really actually do think a lot about at OpenAI is how to endow our nonprofit with the means to be able to execute its mission, and then how does OpenAI work in service of that mission alongside of it in the technology that we build, in the products that we build, in the partners and customers that we engage with.
Yeah, and OpenAI, like others, are working towards artificial general intelligence, but there are growing concerns about the risks that comes with this, dangerous weapons, catastrophic, cyber attacks, even AI becoming uncontrollable. What is OpenAI doing to prevent these risks from happening?
Well, safety is at the core of the mission, but we also now have to think about what that means in an applied sense, right? As you start to serve really powerful AI systems to more consumers, to businesses, across the world, we've really got to think about what it means for society to be able to adopt these systems safely. And so we take a lot of feedback and work with customers. We actually have a term for it actually at OpenAI that we call iterative deployment, which means that we release models. We actually take a lot of feedback, and then we use that feedback to actually improve the models in an iterative process that ultimately makes them much safer, much more reliable, more dependable, and ultimately makes them fit for use by anyone that wants to use them.
We've seen Chinese companies kind of dominate industries that used to be led by American innovators. Is that something that you anticipate will be the type of competition you will face with Chinese players, and how does that shape your strategy here in Asia?
Well, look, we're focused on what we can control, right? And I think what we can control is two things. One is, how does OpenAI build artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence models that serve the needs of consumers, developers, enterprises here in Asia? And then two is, how do we show up as a company to support those customers and users in implementing those models and the things they want to be able to do with them? our view is that there's going to be a host of models and from a lot of different providers over time. There's plenty of efforts, even just in the United States, that are training really good and powerful systems, and we welcome competition. We think competition is good and in some senses validating of the usefulness of these systems. And so whether that's coming from companies in China, whether it's coming from domestic companies here, whether it's coming from companies in the United States, we think it's all great. Our job is to try and make the best models that we can, work as closely with customers as we can to try and help them solve problems, and then build the most useful and safe systems for users everywhere that want to use it to make their lives better.
So ChatGPT definitely gaining traction in the workplace, but what about outside of work? Otelli, I'm wondering, how often do you use AI tools such as ChatGPT?
Henry, I use it a lot, and typically I'll ask, help me analyze this, summarize that, how to answer a difficult question from a colleague, for instance. It's a very handy personal assistant, I have to say. What about you?
So I only use ChatGPT mainly for language studying and also to analyze my music scores. It looks like women like you are indeed using like ChatGPT more often than men. That's why we are seeing, a recent study by OpenAI showing that actually 52% of ChatGPT users are women as of July this year. That's quite a big jump compared with in the year of 2022 when ChatGPT was just launched, because we are seeing that 80% of users are dominated by men that time.
At that time, that's amazing how much the women have actually caught up. In fact, we've also got to consider the age factor, because looking a bit closer at the data, it shows that nearly half of users are between the ages of 18 and 25.
That's right, Otelli. And if you look deeper into that research, you will be surprised to find out that actually young people are less likely to use ChatGPT for work. But by comparison, older professionals tend to tap into that tool in work-related area. And as far as those questions being asked, overall, more than 70% of conversation topics were about, practical guidance like how to seek information or do writing or specific information searching such as recipes and language translation as well.
I know, right? I mean, GPT, a lot of us can't do without it. It's like our
Exactly.
chef, our tutor, our therapist, everything all in one. Well, thanks so very much, Henry. Always good to have you and have that chat. Thanks so much for your business report. Well, on that note, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Hundreds of student activists in South Korea marched down the streets of Seoul, mourning the death of U.S. right-wing figure Charlie Kirk. And could a brain drain in the U.S. be a brain gain for the EU? More academics from China see Europe as their destination of choice as Washington cracks down on higher education. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Fresh tensions in the South China Sea. China fires water cannon at Philippine ships near disputed shoal, accusing them of illegal intrusion and of ramming its vessel. South Korea says tariff talks with the U.S. have stalled as President Lee Jae-myung remains firm in avoiding a deal that could hurt local companies. Plus, the U.S. and China strike a framework agreement over TikTok's American operations to avert a ban. A call between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping on Friday expected to seal the deal. And for more analysis, we are joined now by Dr. Nasha Bafen, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Politics, Media and Philosophy at La Trobe University. Well, thanks, Dr. Bafen, for joining us this evening. First up, let's just talk about this deal structure. It seems pretty vague at the moment. But what sort of a deal, a TikTok deal, looks plausible to you? And at the same time, that it can satisfy both the U.S. lawmakers and Beijing?
I think the word vague is completely correct here. If you look at the language used by the head of the Chinese negotiating team, Mr. Li Chenggang, he says the two sides reached a basic framework consensus in relation to resolving those TikTok deal related issues. But the US side, in contrast, said that Washington and Beijing have reached an agreement to switch TikTok to American-controlled ownership. So the difference in language there is really striking. And as you say, neither side is offering much clarity about what the consensus or the agreement, the consensus if you're talking from the Chinese side, or the agreement if you're talking from the US side. Neither side is offering much clarity about what that consensus or agreement might involve. But we can look at what's happened previously in this space, or what started to happen. So in 2020, Oracle, for example, began hosting TikTok's US data. And Oracle even briefly reached this deal with the first Trump administration to buy TikTok before that agreement was ultimately scuppered during the Biden administration. And we also know that previously US President Donald Trump, he had been floating this 50-50 style joint venture between the parent company, ByteDance, and a new American owner. But I think it's now looking increasingly unlikely that any amount of Chinese ownership would be permitted at all. There's a good chance, I think, that whatever form the deal will take, the US will definitely try to push for the control of American TikTok user data to remain firmly in the hands of a US entity.
And I think because there's still quite a fair bit that's up in the air, we're all anticipating this call on Friday between both the presidents, Xi and Trump, and some of these last mile issues, right? What do you think needs to be hammered out and needs to be settled? And as you've mentioned, and also whether, China, are they going to retain a stake in TikTok under this framework?
Yeah. So the agreement or consensus was reached, I guess, during, I think it's month 4 now, the 4th month of this trade war between the two countries, which we have to note was kicked off by the United States. The tariff hikes, for example, or how Washington has blocked shipments of semiconductors or other advanced tech to China, citing national security concerns. So I think there's going to be a lot of verbal saber rattling surrounding the deal. From the point of view of the US side, that's the key sticking point, those security concerns. The US says Chinese products like TikTok could be used to spy on Americans or to gather intelligence on behalf of, the Chinese government. But from the point of view of the Chinese side, they're being dismissive of those concerns, and they're taking the position that the US is just using national security as a cover for what Beijing is calling unilateral bullying. So I think the issue over the data and the issue over who gets to control that sort of data, as well as, of course, the most valuable thing in the whole deal, and we're assuming that it's going to reach tens of billions of dollars. The most valuable thing in the whole deal will, of course, be TikTok's algorithm, and which is seen as its the key ingredient that makes this particular company so valuable.
That's another major sticking point, the algorithm. But, in the meantime, before even to get to all of that, there's still political hurdles, right? Because the Republican-controlled Congress, they could possibly block or demand tougher conditions. How do you see that panning out?
Yeah, so I actually think that there's going to be a bit of, I'm tempted to think this is a bit of a face-saving thing for both Donald Trump, who previously campaigned on, banning TikTok, citing all of those national security concerns. Funnily enough, he turned around after the election, and after he realized that it actually helped give him a direct through line to young US voters. And that tension that you mentioned between the US president and Congress, it was actually last year that Congress was the one that passed a law that would force the sale of TikTok to a US buyer. I think that President Trump has been reluctant to force TikTok to shut down because he uses it for effective political communication with a younger voting demographic. He credits TikTok for helping him win the US presidency. But there is a perception, of course, that this is a president who is ruling by executive order and that Congress are toothless tigers. And so I suspect that Congress will not come out on top in this battle necessarily, and that if no firm agreement is reached after the call with China this Friday, it's definitely not outside the realms of possibility that Donald Trump will simply extend the deadline again and again to. I absolutely don't think he wants TikTok to be shut down because, as I said, he credits it with popularizing his standing among the younger voting demographic.
Well, thanks so very much for your insights. Really helpful there. Dr. Nasha Buffin, Senior Lecturer, Department of Politics, Media and Philosophy at La Trobe University. Turning our attention to other news now, China's Coast Guard has fired water cannon at Philippine vessels, accusing them of illegally invading its waters near the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. Now, China says that the encounter involved more than 10 Philippine ships, saying that one vessel disregarded warnings and rammed a Chinese Coast Guard ship. Beijing accuses Manila of deliberate infringement and provocation, saying that the Chinese Coast Guard implemented lawful control measures, including verbal warnings and route restrictions. The Philippine Maritime Council rejected those accusations, saying that there is no truth to the Chinese account, calling it disinformation. The Philippine Coast Guard separately said that the water cannon had damaged a fisheries vessel. Well, this latest standoff comes just days after China approved plans to turn Scarborough Shoal into a nature reserve without specifying boundaries. Now, China claims most of the South China Sea, while the Philippines and several other countries assert overlapping maritime rights. The key waterway carries more than $3 trillion worth of shipping commerce annually. Beijing, meantime, has urged Washington to withdraw its Typhon missile system from Japan after it was deployed for the first time for annual drills involving some 20,000 American and Japanese troops. Well, China slammed the mid-range missile system's deployment, calling it a threat to regional security that heightens the risk of an arms race and military confrontation in the region. The land-based launcher is capable of firing Tomahawk cruise missiles from Japan to strike China's eastern seaboard or even parts of Russia. The Typhon's deployment in the Philippines last year drew sharp criticism from Beijing and Moscow. Both accused Washington of fueling an arms race. Japan's agriculture minister and its chief cabinet secretary have both entered a race to lead the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. This comes ahead of a 4th October vote to replace outgoing Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Now, Farm Minister Shinjiro Koizumi is the son of ex-Premier Junichiro Koizumi and is considered among the front-runners. He says he plans to first solidify key policies before partnering up with other opposition parties. He has had some success this year in his task to lower the soaring price of rice. Now, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi declared his candidacy on social media platform X, pledging to lead a new administration that balances stability and growth. There are two other candidates in the race, former Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi, as well as former Economic Security Minister Takayuki Kobayashi. Now, also expected to announce her candidacy is former Internal Affairs Minister Sanae Takaichi. Should she become Japan's first female leader, she is expected to push for economic stimulus and monetary easing. She lost to Prime Minister Ishiba in last year's leadership vote. Over in South Korea, right-wing activists and student groups have been mourning the death of conservative American firebrand Charlie Kirk, even as his legacy divides opinion. Hundreds marched in downtown Seoul over the weekend, chanting, "We are Charlie Kirk." The 31-year-old was a close ally of President Donald Trump and was shot dead last week while speaking at a Utah campus rally. He was known for his prove me wrong debates on abortion, gender, and immigration, building a reputation as a polarizing figure. In Seoul, even pop culture was drawn in as celebrities faced backlash over online tributes. Meanwhile, organizers calling themselves Freedom Univ set up memorials at Namdaemun Gate and the MacArthur statue in Incheon, linking Mr. Kirk's message to the U.S.-Korea alliance. Looks like Europe is seeking to take advantage after the Trump administration cut funding for research programs in the U.S. The EU has launched a number of initiatives to entice some of the brightest minds to join its critical sectors. William Denslow reports for CNA from the Belgian city of Antwerp.
An innovative approach to tackling CO2 emissions. These plasma reactors are used to convert the gas into renewable fuels and valuable chemicals. Annemie Bohers is the head of this research group at the University of Antwerp. She says this process requires some of the brightest minds in the field.
We are in a chemistry department, but our research is very interdisciplinary, so we have a lot of engineers, physicists, chemists as well, so we need to attract them from other countries, and actually our group is very international.
Bohers says the hiring of new postdoc researchers from the US is also in the pipeline.
Researchers at this lab tell me their work requires a diverse team with great chemistry. And they say acquiring talent from the US has become easier over recent months.
It's a trend not isolated to this lab. Academic institutions globally are both competing and collaborating with one another in the quest to innovate. As tensions between a number of US universities and the White House persists, Vice Rector at the University of Antwerp, Martin Venn, says this uncertainty is prompting more academics from nations like China and India to view Europe as an increasingly attractive destination.
It's not clear what is the potential in the long term for people when they move to the US. Well, it is quite clear in Europe. I think that certainty or that uncertainty in the US will make people change their mind to go to the US, to come to Europe instead of the US.
For the European Union, it's a timely trend. Over recent months, the Commission's launched a number of programmes designed to close the competitiveness gap with the likes of the US in key sectors such as technology and science. Back in July, its quantum strategy was released, with a goal of sparking innovation and start-up growth to become a global leader in the field by 2030. A decade further down the line, the EU hopes this class of technology will be worth roughly $180 billion. Academics like Reinhilde Vugelers, a senior fellow at the think tank Bruegel, says it's too early to say whether there will be a large-scale brain drain from the US, and challenges remain when it comes to talent acquisition.
Very often then they turn then to the US market because that's a much bigger single market, willingness to pay also for new innovations here and there in Europe. That framework condition still is an issue.
Netherlands-based Naturalis is both a natural history museum and a leading research institute for biodiversity. While nations like the US may be leading in fields such as artificial intelligence, Naturalis's managing director for digital, Demetrios Koreas, says Europe can evolve to become a hub where such technologies can make a meaningful difference.
How they can apply in areas like biodiversity to be able to deliver more results. And I think this is something that then can flow over in other regions of the world and position Europe not so much as a technology, source of technology, a new technology, but as an amazing powerhouse on how these technologies can really have impact.
By digging out more than $11 billion annually, the EU aims to be a global leader in life sciences by the end of the decade. In an increasingly competitive world, the bloc says that fresh initiatives are needed to ensure that Europe remains at the cutting edge. For CNA, I'm William Denslow in Antwerp.
Coming up in East Asia tonight, move over Thailand. This Southeast Asian country is now the top travel destination for Chinese travelers. Transatlantic ties will be under scrutiny this week as President Donald Trump heads to the UK for a 3-day trip. It's an unprecedented second state visit for the American leader. This time, Mr. Trump will be hosted by King Charles at Windsor Castle and meet Prime Minister Keir Starmer at his country estate. Stuart Smith files this report for CNA from London.
The last time Donald Trump was at Windsor Castle in 2018 during his first term in office, it was for tea with the Queen. On this visit, he'll attend a banquet with the King. For a US president to be offered a second state visit is unprecedented. What's more, one that will include military pomp and pageantry never before displayed in a state visit. Analysts say Prime Minister Keir Starmer is hoping the display of flattery will help keep President Trump on side. The UK was the first country in the world to do a deal with the United States, securing exemptions to new tariffs, but the details of how or if those concessions will be implemented for certain products like steel and aluminium still haven't materialised.
There's still a lot of question marks over the implementation of that deal. So I suspect that for Keir Starmer, the first priority will actually be sorting out how that deal is actually going to be brought into effect and how UK industry is going to be protected, at least to some extent, from the worst impacts of Trump's tariff policies.
Starmer will also want to try to move Washington's position closer to London's on other international issues, to be tougher on Russia and provide more assistance to Gaza, while the US wants Britain to be an ally against China.
The US is probably going to ask Britain to become more aligned with the US in that regard, to contain and isolate China more. The problem is that Britain is also trying to get closer relations with the EU, which has very large trading relations with China, and Britain post-Brexit needs China more than the US does. And that's going to cause a greater deal of tension.
Echo the comments.
Trump may reportedly bring along the bosses of some of the world's biggest tech companies, like Apple, OpenAI and Nvidia. That would be in line with the UK's growth priorities and geopolitical strategy, which bets on Britain becoming a leader in world-changing tech, like artificial intelligence and nuclear fusion, by partnering with the US. In a speech earlier this month, the then British ambassador to Washington said it was through such a partnership that Britain would help challenge China.
US-China competition will define this century. The Atlantic Alliance must evolve to meet the greatest challenge of our age, and that is keeping ahead in the global technology race that will determine our fate in the 21st century.
Trump's last visit to the UK, a private visit to Scotland in July, was met with protests. And protests are once again expected, not just from the public, but politicians too. Already, the leader of Britain's third largest political party, Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats, says he will boycott the state banquet over Trump's handling of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Perhaps to minimise controversy, there are no public engagements scheduled, and the president is expected to travel between locations by helicopter.
The government also managed to avoid a clash with Parliament by inviting Donald Trump when the House of Commons is in recess, skirting any potential debate about whether the president should provide the traditional address to lawmakers. For CNA, I'm Stuart Smith in London.
It looks like Vietnam has become the top holiday destination for Chinese tourists, unseating Thailand because of safety concerns. Vietnam saw 3.5 million arrivals from China this year, nearly 50% more than last year's figures. Hanoi has been putting in the work, developing paragliding and hot air balloon festivals, and hiring more Mandarin-speaking staff in hotels. Experts note that Vietnam offers more authentic and off-track experiences for a new wave of more discerning Chinese travelers. Now, Chinese tourists still make up Thailand's biggest source of market, but the sharp fall in numbers has led to a 7% drop in overall foreign visitors and an estimated loss of $3.5 billion in revenue. Travelers were worried about safety after the abduction of Chinese actor Wang Xing, who was trafficked to Myanmar by an online scam syndicate. And that wraps up this Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.